All right, welcome to Cwic Media's Come Follow Me series. We're covering sections 51 through 57. We're going to focus on sections 51 and 52 here. I'm very late in getting this out this week. I apologize for that, but it's been a big week for Cwic Media, and we've been working on a lot of other initiatives this week. Okay, before I get started, I just want to give a shout out to, we're a global podcast here, which is kind of fun. We get a lot of feedback and from a lot of listeners around the world, but I specifically want to give a shout out to a couple of different areas where we have a pretty good, strong following. And that is first in Africa, where we have a number of followers in South Africa and Ghana, Mozambique, and a few other areas. They're in the African continent. So a shout out over there. We love hearing the feedback that we get from our African brothers and sisters over there. The other is on the other side of the globe, and that would be over in the Polynesian Islands. We've got a great following in Samoa and in Tonga, and some of the other in Hawaii and other places as well. So a shout out to the Polynesian Islands out over there and to our Polynesian brothers and sisters. All right, so sections 51 here, we're coming back on the theme here where we talk about the dispensation being laid out line upon line and precept upon precept. And we've seen how we've moved into this world here of this time frame here of early to mid 1831, where we're talking more and more about Zion. We're talking more and more about the idea of moving up those four phases of the priesthood that I talk about and getting to that highest level, which is the Melchizedek level and the area of Zion and community, right? And we're going to continue with that here. So section 51 is again, we're kind of reinforcing the idea of the Law of Consecration. Keep in mind, a little bit of context on this, that what's happening is the saints are in Kirtland and also over in New York and a few other places, but primarily in those two areas. And there's a lot of persecution happening to the saints in New York, especially in the Colesville area. And so they are going to be coming over with some urgency over to Ohio, onto some land, right? And mostly from Layman Copley, actually. And so they're coming over into this land, and they come urgently. They don't have everything with them, perhaps, and of their material goods. They need places to stay. They need land to be able to build and to improve. And that kind of sets forth the need, again, to talk about the Law of Consecration. How are the current saints in the Kirtland area going to be able to help provide for these saints that are coming over from New York and from other places as well? And so that's where section 51 kind of comes from here, right? How do we handle these types of things? Now, I think it's important to understand that the Lord works with needs, right? With the needs of the time and of the period. And we can see there's changes in some things that the Lord works with as the saints develop in the dispensation, right? We follow a few different things today than the saints did early in the 1830s. But the Lord's leading them along, line upon line and precept upon precept. One of the things that they're really focused on here is going to be the Law of Consecration. But there's going to be changes with this. We should not confuse the Law of Consecration here that we see in 1831 with what happens later in 1833, right? When the saints move down to Missouri, the state of Missouri, they're going to have a different something different is going to happen, right? They're going to be following different laws, and the reason is because of Missouri law, right? About 2 years later here, there are church members that leave the church, and here in 1831, where we get section 51, the way the law of the Lord was here for this time was that the saints would deed over their properties to the church, And then if you left the church, you would not be able to get your property back, right? Because that property is being brought in and helping the community, and you're still left a steward over this. You're responsible for its production, for its success, right? And that's important to understand. But you would lose your property if you left the church. Now, in 1833, 2 years from now, as we're going over here, I think it's Bates that leaves the church and takes the church to court, and the church loses. And so what happens is that Joseph Smith changes the section a little bit here. What we have today is the 1833 version of Section 51, where there used to be an additional scripture between verses 2 and 3, and where verse 5 was not included in 1831, right? So there's a couple of changes here based on the change that happened according to law, right? Sometimes you have to work within those parameters. The other thing to understand is we get later on we hear about the United Order, for example. That is something different. Different rules than what was being followed here in 1831. It's not all the same thing. So the Lord works in different ways based on the needs of the saints. So even though we hear oftentimes, especially right now, I've heard a lot that the law of consecration was never rescinded. Well, that might be true. But the policies around the law of consecration have changed. They've changed, obviously. And in many ways, yes, we weren't completely ready for this, and we don't live it completely. But I want to go over the principles of this just a little bit, and that's what we're going to focus on in this episode. So let's move down here a little bit. So verse 2, for it must needs be that they organized according to my laws, that they be organized according to my laws. This is the people. If otherwise, they will be cut off. Okay. Now, well, let's keep going down here. I want to focus in here a little bit on verse 3. Wherefore, let my servant Edward Partridge, the bishop, over temporal things, and those whom he has chosen, in whom I am well pleased, appoint unto this people their portions, every man equal according to his family, according to his circumstances, and his wants and his needs. All right, so you have something here that is not about a final equality, right? In other words, okay, the Johnson family, the Smith family, they're all going to get exactly the same thing on this. No, it's they're going to be stewards over something different. What if you have just a couple, an older couple that can't work the land very well and they don't have any kids with them? It doesn't make sense to give them a larger acreage of land, especially if they're coming in, right? Because they can't work it. They don't have the resources, the labor to be able to do that. They're going to be in a different circumstance. But if I'm a younger guy and I've got my wife and I've got 4 kids, and a couple of them, maybe I've got a couple of teenage boys that can really help, and a couple of the other women that can really help in all of the laborious domestic things that early 19th century families had to deal with. Well, that makes more sense because I can be, as a family unit, more productive on the land, right? So that's different. And I have greater needs for consumption, right? For food and for water. So this is not about an idea of equity at the end, right? Everything being the same. It's a horrible idea. That's a horrible, unchristian principle, right? Okay, so that's the first thing to understand. The other thing I want to go over here is the idea that, well, let's go to 4 first here, and then I'm going to go over this idea of law of consecration a little bit more. And let my servant Edward Partridge, when he shall appoint a man his portion, it's going to be different portions, give unto him a writing that shall secure unto him his portion. Okay, a writing, right? Something that he's may not be the deed. I don't have the deed, but it's like, okay, this is what you are in charge of, right? that he shall hold it, even this right and this inheritance in the church, until he transgresses and is not accounted worthy by the voice of the church, according to the laws and covenants of the church to belong to the church. This is how it was originally in 1831, right? Well, let's keep going a little bit further here. Verse 6, and thus all things shall be made sure according to the laws of the land. 8, and the money which is left unto this people, let there be an agent appointed unto this people to take the money, to provide food and raiment according to the wants of this people. And then 9 finally. And let every man deal honestly. This is crucial in working with each other, and be alike among this people. Alike how? Well, we hear. Be alike among this people and receive alike. This is, again, I talk about charity and relational covenant. This is really important to understand in terms of the law of consecration, that you have to be able to give and you have to be able to receive, because everybody's different. This is what it means. Or then it goes right into Zion here, which is in verse 9, that ye may be one, even as I have commanded you, right? So we've been told. This is what we get again in the intercessory prayer in John 17. It's about becoming one, a union. And how do we do that? Well, we've just been going over here the fact that there are different needs and different wants and different resources and different capabilities. So when we work in the church, in our ward, for example, we look for those gifts of the Spirit and maybe even some temporal gifts where people can help other people out. So I've heard this a lot, and I don't fully agree with this, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, but this doesn't seem to follow along my understanding of the law of consecration. I've heard it said several times that the law of consecration was kind of removed, or rescinded. It wasn't rescinded, but we didn't accept it. Therefore, what was given to us in place of that was the law of tithing. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's true. And I think that when we look at the law of consecration, we need to look at it. We keep thinking, well, it means we're going to give all our material goods and our land, and that is the law of consecration. That's not true. That's not in principle what it is. That is only the temporal idea, number one. And unless you give context even to that, you're not fully understanding, because you need to understand what it means to be the steward of those things. And because here's the thing, again, what happens if I'm the steward of land, of farmland, and my family goes out and we don't do a very good job and we don't produce that much and there's not much there. And we struggle even feeding ourselves. And that might be because of health, that might be because we're lazy, whatever reason it is. And, the other family down the road here, a couple acres away, they just produce like crazy. Or maybe they've got better soil or better who knows what, or they're harder workers. It doesn't matter, regardless, right? Things are still going to be out of whack. That's important to see, because there is meritocracy and there is also luck, right? There are different things that play into this. And so it's not an issue of equity. That's not what it is the way I see it. But the principle of the law of consecration is that we're going to give our talents, and think of talents in the term of the parable of the talents. Not as tap dancing, not as singing, not as playing the piano, right? Not as craft. Those are all things you can do, but that's not what the parable of the talents is about. This, to me, is all about the parable of the talents and charity becoming one, right? So going back to the parable of the talents again. One servant is given 5 talents. That's 5 pieces of silver. That's what that is. It is pieces of silver. It's spiritual capital, and maybe temporal capital even. Another servant is given 2. So between those 2, the reason you give 2 different examples there is because some people are given more. and some people are given less. We get this idea even when we come into the world, right? What if you're born in a modern time and in a nice suburb and a strong family, and you have the gospel and all your needs are taken care of? Well, that in many ways, you've got a lot more talents, a lot more pieces of silver. Right? Maybe you're gifted in some way physically. Maybe you're a great athlete. That's a talent. That is a piece of silver. Maybe you're really smart. Right? Maybe you're given great health. Regardless of what it is, we want to look at this, that there is disparity. Some people have more of something and some people have less. And I believe that is why you have the 5 and the 2 especially. Yes, there's a third servant that has 1. I'll get into that in a minute. But let's look at that in a way that the servant that has 5 and the servant that has 2, they're both going to go out. And what do? What are they doing? They're investing their talents, right? A talent is spiritual capital or physical capital. It's their capital. And what are they investing it in? If you look at that parable, I believe what they're investing it in is other people. That's what that means, right? They're going out and they're investing what they have, temporal or spiritual. They're spiritual gifts that they've been given. Remember, we read in Moroni, or we read in Corinthians, we read in the Doctrine and Covenants about how some people are given this and some people are given this spiritual gift and some people are given this. Why is that always pulled together with faith, hope, and charity? Because charity is taking what you have, the spiritual gifts you've been given, the silver that you've been given, the spiritual silver that you've been given, and going out and investing it in other people. Because when you do that, if I'm the servant that has 5 pieces of silver, and I go out and I help others, and then what happens is now that other person might have 2 more pieces of silver, or maybe I can give 5 pieces of silver to them in a sense, because I'm investing in that person. And now I come back to the Lord, my Lord, as this servant, right, as his steward, and I not only bring back my 5 that I had originally that he gave me, but I've got 5 more because I've got somebody else that I have worked with and shared my gifts with. That's the law of consecration. That's how I see it. That's how I see the principle there. And then somebody who has less, maybe I'm the person that only actually has 2 silver pieces spiritually. It's okay. I can go out and I can invest in another person with what I have. And now I come back and I've got another person and they've got 2 of those spiritual gifts that I'm able to share. And I can come back to my Lord, who I am the steward, and now I've doubled the amount of silver. I've doubled the amount of spirituality. I've doubled the amount of glory. Right? I've doubled the amount of righteousness. Now, I can also say that I'm doing that with myself. I'm taking the 2 pieces of silver that's been given me, and I'm working toward getting 2 more. Even with myself, because I am gaining more spiritual gifts as I work on it. And now I had 2, and now I come back to the Lord, and I've got 4 within myself even. Right? So that is a way to look at that. That's not as much about the law of consecration because we're helping others, but that is the same principle, I think, that you would look at. And the reason it's important to see that is because the third servant, who's the third servant? What does that third servant do? That third steward? Well, they've only got 1. And as important as it is here, as we just saw here in verse 9, right? And let every man deal honestly and be alike among this people. Operate the same way. Work in the same eternal principles. And receive alike, that ye may be one. Right? So if I've got the 1 talent, I've got the 1 piece of silver, and I maybe I haven't been given much overall. But instead of going out and saying, I'm going to go out and spread what I have, a goodness that I have, because that's going to increase, right? The whole idea is increasing the number of pieces of silver to bring back to the Lord, that spiritual silver back to the Lord. But instead, I'm going to turn around and what am I probably going to do? Right? What does that third servant do? Well, they bury it in the ground. I would look at that, honestly, especially looking at today's environment, as victimhood to some degree. Look, they have 5, they have 2. Maybe I'm envious. And again, I'm not just talking about temporal wealth. I'm talking about everything. Instead of saying, Lord, I am grateful for what I have been given, and now I'm going to increase that amount by sharing it with others, or increase it by learning myself to grow and to progress, to increase the number of spiritual silver talents that I have. That's what I see there as the parable of the talents. It's like the law of consecration. Everybody has a different amount. That's why it's important that parable is set up that way. And we talk about stewardship here later on in the verses here. Now, verse 10 real quick, and let that which belongeth to this people not be taken and given unto that of another church. What are we talking about here? We're talking about another congregation, right? I'm pretty sure that's what they mean, right? It's we work within wards, a ward budget. We have a ward missionary fund, right? We look at bringing in fast offerings to help other members of the ward, and that's a really good way to do that. We make it more intimate. We make it closer. As we try to centralize things so much, there's a law sociologically that happens that when you get beyond certain numbers in groups, you start losing individuality. It's not just a matter of being able to manage it from the top. We think about Moses and Jethro and breaking things down into hundreds and 50s and 10s, but it's a matter of the individual and how they are represented, because the further away you get from that, right? The U.S., for example, right? You've got well over 300 million people here. That's a problem. To try and continue to centralize everything, you're moving further and further away from the individual, right? That's a problem. So the way that there's still church-wide funds, but there's also ward funds and stake funds, and it brings it much closer to the individual. I think that's the right way to do that. So that's what that's talking about, I think, right? Is at a local level. You want to keep that at a local level as much as possible. Now, toward the end here in verse 16, and I consecrate unto them this land for a little season, until I, the Lord, shall provide them for them otherwise, and command them to go hence. That goes with verse 17 here. And the hour and the day is not given unto them, being when the Lord will return. Wherefore let them act upon this land as for years, and this shall turn unto them for their good. Right, so we're getting the balance here, the other side of the coin of looking at the signs of the times, I think. Right, I can become a doomsdayer, right, and I can act as if everything is going to end now, because I see signs and I see things breaking down, and those things are all happening, right? I mean, we see signs and trends of things that are happening, no doubt. But he's telling us this on the other side of that. Okay, but I'm not telling you when I'm coming. Don't act as if, don't retreat, so to speak. Don't focus so hard on everything that you don't act every day as you should, as if I'm not going to be there. Act as if in your life righteousness, that as if I'm going to come tomorrow. But as far as your everyday living, right, that's the way I see it. Act upon this land as for years, as if it's going to be a while. Don't stop living, is the way I see that. And then we get the idea again of the steward here, as we were talking about with the parable of the talents. I think that's a really important way to look at this, the parable of the talents. It combines charity, the idea of charity and relational covenant, with the law of consecration here. 19, and whoso is found a faithful, a just, and a wise steward. Think about the talents of the parable of the talents. Shall enter into the joy of this Lord and shall inherit eternal life. Right? So it's kind of bringing that whole idea here together. And then in 51, we come down and we start seeing more and more about, again, when we're talking about the law of consecration, that is the phase 4 of the 4 phases of the priesthood. It's talking about Zion. Well, in Zion, you have a promised land. You have this oneness as far as how you're going to live, the parable of the talents. You also have a promised land that you are working toward, which is a representation of exaltation. And so we get this in verse 2 saying, I, the Lord, will make known unto you what I will, that ye should do from this time until the next conference, which shall be held in Missouri, upon the land which I will consecrate unto my people, which are a remnant of Jacob, and those who are heirs according to the covenant. Okay, the remnant of Jacob. We're starting to talk about the people of Israel, the gathering of Israel. There's this idea of gathering Israel to a consecrated land, right? Temples, a new Jerusalem, Zion, the law of consecration. These are all things that are being brought together here. We see in verse 5 here similar language. And it shall also, inasmuch as they are faithful, be made known unto them the land of your inheritance. Right? So that is exaltation spiritually, physically, temporally. That is the New Jerusalem, where that's going to be. And then, of course, there are consequences for your decisions. It's not all grace all the time. And inasmuch as they are not faithful, they shall be cut off, even if I will, as seemeth them good. We have to be obedient. We have to grow. We have to do something with the spiritual talents, with the spiritual silver. Now, going back to the parable of the talents here with 12 and 13 and 14. And let my servant Lyman White beware, for Satan desireth to sift him as chaff. Well, that's prophetic right there. And 13, and behold, he that is faithful shall be made ruler over many things. That is the parable of the talents, right? That's if I am over 5 and I'm faithful, I'm going to be ruler over more. It's the same idea. It's not the end that is equal. It is the opportunity that is equal. We all need to go through a process of growth and becoming through living righteously and dealing with adversity. And you can see this pattern with the parable of the talents, with the law of consecration. Here's 14. And again, I will give unto you a pattern in all things, that ye may not be deceived. For Satan is abroad in the land, and he goeth forth deceiving the nations. Don't take your spiritual capital and hide it. Don't be a victim. Be a good steward. Right? Otherwise, in 18, and again, he that is overcome and bringeth not forth fruits, that's the servant with 1 piece of silver, even according to this pattern, is not of me. Right? Wherefore by this pattern ye shall know the spirits in all cases under the whole heavens. Okay, and then we get the first ordinations to the office of high priest that come through here, which is, it's like the 4th phase of the priesthood, is what it is. It's going right along with that. That makes all the sense in the world to me. And then again, it's all about this second coming, the royal procession coming in and getting ready for that by gathering Israel to a promised land, becoming one as a people through the law of consecration, right? The law of consecration, then, as we do this all the time, I think that tithing is a part of the law of consecration. You're giving something to someone else. You're contributing to the church that helps all members of the church, right? Your fast offerings is part of, I'm talking about temporal things here, but your fast offerings are part of the law of consecration. You might have a little bit more. You're giving to somebody who has a little bit less. Your calling is part of the law of consecration, because you are giving of your gifts that you have, be it 1, 2, or 5 talents of spiritual capital. You're giving to those around you so that you can grow that capital. You can invest it in other people and grow it. And where they may be deficient in an area, you may have more. And you're sharing that with others. And so that culminates here in verses 42 to 44 to end section 52. And thus, even as I have said, if ye are faithful, ye shall assemble yourselves together to rejoice upon the land of Missouri, which is the land of your inheritance, which is now the land of your enemies. Sounds like the children of Israel having to move into the lands of the Canaanites. But behold, I, the Lord, will hasten the city in its time, and will crown the faithful, think of the stewards, with joy and with rejoicing. Behold, I am Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and I will lift them up at the last day, even so, amen. Again, thinking of the brazen serpent is where I think you need to go with that phrase all the time. I'll talk to you next time.